The breakfast alarm chimed softly through the residential quarters of New Eden Colony as Robert Hayes finished his morning coffee. Outside his window, the artificial sunrise painted the biodomes in golden hues that reminded him of Earth mornings from his childhood. His daughter Emma was already awake, pressing her small hands against the reinforced glass to watch the automated harvesters tend to the wheat fields below. "Daddy, why do the machines wake up before us?" Emma asked, her breath fogging the window as she spoke. Robert smiled and picked up his work tablet, checking the daily reports from the atmospheric processors. "Because they never get tired, sweetheart. They work all night so we can have fresh air and food when we wake up." The colony of New Eden stretched across 3 continents of the planet designated as Kepler 452c in the star charts, 50,000. Humans had made this world their home over the past 15 years, building cities under protective domes and gradually terraforming the atmosphere to support human life. Children born here had never seen Earth, knowing only the red-tinged sunsets and the twin moons that rose each evening. Maya Chun stood in the central command center, her fingers dancing across the holographic displays that showed the colony's vital signs. Power generation was at optimal levels, the water recycling systems were running smoothly, and the agricultural sectors were producing enough food to support the growing population. She had been the colony's chief administrator for 3 years, and every morning brought the same satisfying routine of checking systems and planning for the future. "Maya, we've got some unusual readings on the long-range scanners," called out David Kim from the communications station. His voice carried a note of concern that made Maya turn away from her displays. "What kind of unusual?" Maya asked, walking over to peer at David's screens. "Energy signatures about 3 days out from the outer system. They're not matching any known human vessel configurations, and the power readings are off the charts." Maya frowned. New Eden was far from any established trade routes, and unexpected visitors were rare. "Are you sure it's not just cosmic radiation or solar activity?" David shook his head. "I've run the data through every filter we have. These are definitely artificial energy sources, and they're heading straight for us." The readings showed massive objects moving through space at velocities that suggested advanced propulsion technology. Maya felt a chill run down her spine as she realized that these ships were larger than anything in the human fleet, much larger. "Send a message to Earth." "Command," Maya ordered. "Full data packet with all our scanner readings, and prep the emergency broadcast system just in case." 3 days later the ships arrived. The hegemony fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the solar system like a pack of predators scenting blood. Admiral Voss stood in the command center of the flagship Dominator, his scaled hide reflecting the dim lighting as he studied the tactical displays. The small human colony registered as barely a blip on their sensors, but orders were orders. "Pathetic," Voss muttered in his native tongue, watching the primitive energy signatures of the human settlement. "They build on our ancestral worlds and think we will not notice." The hegemony had ruled this sector of space for over 2,000 years. Their reptilian forms were perfectly adapted for interstellar conquest, and their technology had crushed dozens of species that had dared to challenge their dominance. To them, the humans were nothing more than an invasive species that needed to be eliminated. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the planet," reported his communications officer. "Ignore it," Voss commanded. "Begin the cleansing." Maya watched in horror as the alien ships moved into orbital positions around New Eden. The vessels were enormous, each one easily 10 times the size of the largest human starship. Their hull designs were angular and aggressive, covered in weapon ports that glowed with barely contained energy. "Unknown vessels, this is Administrator Maya Chun of the New Eden Colony," she broadcast on all frequencies. "We are a peaceful settlement under the protection of the Terran Federation. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions." The response came not in words but in weapons fire. The first salvo struck the northern agricultural dome, vaporizing 3 square kilometers of farmland in a brilliant flash of plasma energy. The shock wave shattered windows across the colony and sent Thousands of people running for emergency shelters. Robert Hayes had been walking Emma to school when the sky exploded. The little girl screamed as the ground shook beneath their feet, and Robert scooped her up, running for the nearest emergency bunker. All around them, people were shouting and crying as more energy beams lanced down from orbit. "Daddy, what's happening?" Emma sobbed against his shoulder. "I don't know, baby," Robert whispered, his heart pounding as he reached the bunker entrance. "But we're going to be okay. I promise." The orbital bombardment continued for 6 hours. The alien ships methodically destroyed every major structure on the planet, working their way through the colony's defenses with ruthless efficiency. The small security force that New Eden maintained was annihilated in the first minutes of the attack, their weapons useless against the superior alien technology. Maya stayed at her post in the command center even as the building shook around her. Emergency reports flooded in from across the colony. The hospital in Sector 7 had been hit. The main power plant was offline. The Eastern Residential District was on fire. "David, get me a channel to Earth," Maya ordered, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Communications are down, Administrator." They hit the relay stations first. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them with grim determination. "Then we used the emergency beacon. Full automated transmission with all our data logs." The emergency beacon was designed to send a compressed data burst toward Earth using the colony's most powerful transmitter. It would take 3 days for the message to reach human space, but it was their only hope of getting word out about what was happening. "Beacon is charging," David reported. 30 seconds to transmission." Another explosion rocked the command center, and Maya grabbed the edge of her console to keep from falling. Through the reinforced windows, she could see the residential domes collapsing under the alien assault. Thousands of people were dying, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. "Beacon ready," David announced. "Send it," Maya said quietly. "Tell them what happened here. Tell them we tried." The transmission lasted exactly 14 seconds before a plasma bolt struck the command center. Maya Chen, David Kim, and the rest of the colony's leadership died instantly, their final act being to warn Earth of the threat that had destroyed their world. Robert Hayes held Emma close as the bunker shook with each impact. The emergency lights flickered and went out, leaving them in darkness with the other survivors. Someone was crying in the corner. A child was calling for his mother. The air tasted of smoke and fear. "When will it stop, Daddy?" Emma whispered. Robert didn't answer because he didn't know. Outside, the alien ships continued their methodical destruction of everything the colonists had built. By dawn, New Eden was a smoking ruin, and 50,000 human lives had been snuffed out like candles in the wind. The hegemony fleet departed as suddenly as it had arrived, leaving behind only ash and silence. In the depths of space, a small emergency beacon continued its journey toward Earth, carrying the final testament of a dead world. The emergency beacon from New Eden arrived at Earth's Deep Space Monitoring Station on a Tuesday morning that would forever change the course of human history. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell was drinking her third cup of coffee when the priority alert chimed across her workstation, indicating an automated distress signal from the outer colonies. "Control, this is Station Delta 7. We're receiving a code black transmission from the Kepler 452c system," Sarah reported, her fingers already working to decode the compressed data stream. The automated message began playing through the station's speakers, and Sarah's coffee cup slipped from her nerveless fingers as Maya Chun's final words echoed through the command center. The recording detailed the arrival of unknown alien vessels, the systematic destruction of the colony, and the complete loss of all 50,000 inhabitants within an hour. The data package was racing through quantum communication channels. Toward Earth, President Williams was pulled from a budget meeting to view the footage recovered from New Eden's security systems, and the blood drained from her face as she watched peaceful colonists being vaporized by alien weapons. "Get me Admiral Ross," she ordered, her voice tight with controlled fury, "and convene an emergency session of the Global Defense Council. Full authorization protocols." The footage from New Eden spread through Earth's government channels like Wildfire. Security cameras had captured the final moments of families huddled in emergency shelters, children crying for parents who would never answer, and the methodical destruction of everything humanity had built on that distant world. Admiral Jackson Ross stood in the Pentagon's secure briefing room, his weathered face grim as he addressed the assembled leaders of Earth's military forces. Behind him, holographic displays showed the tactical analysis of the alien attack, highlighting the overwhelming technological superiority of the hostile force. Ladies and gentlemen, we are facing an enemy that can deploy weapons with the power to level cities from orbit, Ross began, his voice carrying the weight of 40 years of military service. They struck without warning, without attempting communication, and they left no survivors. This was not a military action. This was genocide. General Patricia Kim, head of the Space Force Strategic Command, activated her personal datapad and began reading from classified files. Our intelligence estimates suggest that the attacking force consisted of approximately 50 vessels, each one significantly larger than our biggest dreadnoughts. If they return, our current fleet strength would be insufficient to mount an effective defense. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Earth's military had been designed primarily for defensive operations and small-scale conflicts with pirates or rogue colonies. The idea of facing a technologically superior enemy intent on extermination had been considered, but never seriously planned for. What are our options? Asked Secretary of Defense Martinez, his hands clasped tightly on the conference table. Ross smiled grimly and activated a new set of holographic displays. That depends on how many ships you think we really have. The displays showed star charts of human space, but instead of the usual markings indicating active military bases, these charts were covered in hundreds of previously unknown facility markers. Hidden shipyards tucked away in asteroid fields, automated construction facilities operating in the depths of gas giant atmospheres, and massive storage depots scattered across seemingly uninhabited worlds. For the past 50 years, we've been building ships and mothballing them, Ross explained. Every time we've had a budget surplus, every time we've developed new technology, every time we've found a new source of raw materials, we've been preparing for a threat exactly like this. Dr. Rebecca Hayes, the head of the Terran Research Division, stood up and began manipulating the holographic displays with practiced ease. The public believes we have approximately 30,000 active military vessels. The real number is closer to 800,000. The silence in the room was deafening. President Williams leaned forward in her chair, her eyes wide with disbelief. 800,000 ships? Where have you been hiding 800,000 ships? Everywhere, Hayes replied simply. The mining colonies in the asteroid belt aren't just extracting minerals. They're building hulls. The research stations around Jupiter aren't just studying the planet. They're testing new weapon systems. The agricultural worlds in the outer systems aren't just growing food. They're manufacturing components. Ross activated another display showing the production capacity of human space. We've been running a distributed manufacturing network for decades. Every human settlement contributes to the war effort, even if they don't know it. The cargo haulers that ship grain between worlds also carry weapon components. The passenger liners that ferry colonists to new worlds also transport military personnel to secret facilities. The alien force that destroyed New Eden was powerful, General Kim added, but they were facing a peaceful colony with minimal defenses. They have never encountered the full military might of humanity at war. President Williams stood up slowly, her expression shifting from shock to cold determination. How long would it take to activate these hidden fleets? 72 hours for the first wave, Ross replied. 2 weeks for full mobilization. The ships are already built, fueled, and equipped. We just need to crew them and bring them online. The president looked around the room at the faces of her military leaders, seeing the same grim resolve reflected in their eyes. Then we activate everything. Every ship, every weapon, every soldier. The aliens wanted to send us a message by destroying New Eden, while we're going to send them a message right back. The mobilization orders went out within hours of the emergency session. Across human space, sleeper facilities that had been dormant for decades suddenly came to life. Automated systems began powering up massive starships that had been stored. In the cold of space, waiting for the day they would be needed, Captain Lisa Wong had been commanding a small patrol vessel on the edge of the Sol system when the activation order came through her secure communication channel. The coordinates she was given led her to what appeared to be an empty region of space near Saturn's rings. But as she approached, massive blast doors began opening in the side of a previously invisible asteroid. "Control, this is Captain Wong of the patrol vessel, Mercy. I'm seeing a lot of ships in here, a lot of very big ships." The hidden shipyard contained 200 vessels of the line, each one a kilometer long and bristling with weapons that had been designed specifically for fighting enemies with superior technology. The human strategy was simple. If they couldn't match the alien ship for ship, they would overwhelm them with numbers. Similar scenes played out across human space as the secret fleets revealed themselves. The Europa shipyards disgorged 300 heavy cruisers. The Titan facility launched 500 destroyers. The asteroid belt production centers contributed 2,000 frigates and corvettes. Admiral Ross stood in the command center of Luna Base, watching as the tactical displays filled with ship icons representing the greatest military force in human history. The aliens had made a critical error in their assessment of human capabilities. They had seen the small, peaceful colonies and assumed that humanity was weak and defenseless. "Status report," Ross ordered. "First wave is at 70% readiness," reported his aide. "Second wave is at 40%. Full mobilization will be complete in 10 days. And the enemy? Long-range scouts report no alien activity in the border systems. They appear to have withdrawn to their home territory after the attack on New Eden." Ross nodded grimly. The aliens thought they had delivered a crushing blow to humanity's expansion into space. They had no idea that their attack had awakened a sleeping giant that had been preparing for this moment for half a century. "Send a message to all fleet commanders," Ross ordered. "Begin Phase 1 operations. It's time to show the galaxy what happens when you murder human children." The massive fleet began moving toward the border systems. 700,000 ships carrying the combined fury of an entire species. The aliens had started this war with an act of genocide, but humanity was going to finish it with an act of justice that would echo through the stars for generations to come. The massive cargo hauler Prosperity had been making routine supply runs between the mining colonies for 15 years, its captain never suspecting that his ship was anything more than a civilian transport vessel. When the activation codes arrived, through his secure communication system, Captain Mike Torres watched in amazement as hidden panels opened throughout his ship, revealing military-grade weapons and armor plating that transformed his humble freighter into a warship. "Well, I'll be damned," Torres muttered, reading through the classified technical manuals that had suddenly appeared in his computer systems. "All these years I thought I was just hauling ore and supplies." Similar transformations were occurring throughout human space as the true extent of humanity's military preparation revealed itself. The massive industrial complexes that had been labeled as mining operations were actually weapons manufacturing facilities. The research stations studying stellar phenomena were actually testing new military technologies. The peaceful agricultural worlds were actually training centers for military personnel. General Patricia Kim stood in the command center of the newly revealed Mars Military Complex, a facility that had been disguised as a terraforming research station for decades. The vast underground chambers stretched for kilometers beneath the planet's surface, housing production lines that had been building ships and weapons in secret for 50 years. "Status report on the fleet mobilization," Kim ordered her staff, scrambling to coordinate the activation of hundreds of hidden facilities across human space. "Second Fleet is fully operational and moving toward the staging area at Vol 359, reported Colonel Anderson, his console displaying ship movements across a dozen star systems. Third Fleet is at 80% readiness. Fourth through 10th Fleets are coming online as we speak." The human military had learned valuable lessons from studying the histories of Earth's great wars. The key to victory against the technologically superior enemy was not to match them weapon for weapon, but to overwhelm them with numbers and superior logistics. Every human colony, every mining operation, every research station had been contributing to a war machine that could produce ships faster than any enemy could destroy them. Dr. Rebecca Hayes monitored the industrial output from her command post on Luna, watching as automated production facilities across human space shifted into wartime configuration. The asteroid mining operations began producing armor plating instead of raw materials. The gas giant refineries started manufacturing fuel for warships instead of civilian vessels. The orbital farms continued growing food, but now they were feeding the crews of 700,000 military vessels. The aliens made a fundamental error in their intelligence assessment, Hayes explained to her staff. They looked at our visible military forces and assumed that was all we had. They never considered that a species capable of interstellar colonization might have the industrial capacity to build a fleet this size. The enemy's own intelligence reports had been laughably inaccurate. The hegemony had identified humanity as a minor threat with perhaps 30,000 combat vessels scattered across their small territory. Their strategic planners had assumed that the destruction of a single colony would be enough to convince the humans to abandon their expansion into what the hegemony considered their territory. Captain Lisa Wong stood on the bridge of the heavy cruiser Retribution as it moved through space alongside 200 sister ships of the 7th Fleet. The vessel had been built in the hidden shipyards of Europa, its existence known only to a small number of military personnel and the automated systems that had maintained it for decades. Captain, we're receiving deployment orders from Fleet Command, reported her communications officer, Lieutenant Thompson. Put it on the main screen, Wong ordered, studying the tactical display that showed the movement of human forces across multiple star systems. The deployment plan was elegant in its simplicity. The first wave of 200,000 ships would establish control of the border systems and gather intelligence on enemy positions. The second wave would consist of 300,000 heavy combat vessels designed to engage the enemy's main fleet. The third wave would be the siege platforms and strategic weapons that would reduce enemy worlds to rubble if necessary. Admiral Ross had spent 40 years studying military history and strategy, and he understood that the key to victory was not just superior numbers but superior coordination. The human fleet used a distributed command system that allowed individual captains to make tactical decisions while maintaining overall strategic coherence. This was a fundamental advantage over the hegemony's rigid command structure. All fleet commanders, this is Admiral Ross, he broadcast to the 700,000 ships preparing for deployment. The enemy believes they have dealt us a crushing blow by destroying New Eden. They have no idea that their attack has awakened a military force that has been preparing for this moment for 50 years. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Across human space, ship captains acknowledged their orders and began moving toward their assigned positions. The sheer scale of the operation was staggering. 700,000 vessels, each one crewed by humans who had lost friends and family in the destruction of New Eden, were converging on enemy territory with a single purpose: revenge. The hegemony's border monitoring stations detected the first human ships 3 days after the mobilization began. The alien technicians studying the sensor readings assumed they were looking at a navigation error or equipment malfunction. The idea that humans could deploy forces of this magnitude was simply inconceivable. Sector Commander, we're detecting unusual activity in the human border systems, reported a junior officer to his superior. Define unusual, the Sector Commander replied, not looking up from his strategic planning documents. Approximately 50,000 human vessels moving toward our territory, the Sector Commander's head snapped up. 50,000? That's impossible. Our intelligence indicates the humans have at most 30,000 ships in their entire fleet. Sir, I've verified the readings multiple times. The signatures are definitely human and they're all military vessels. The Sector Commander activated his personal communication device and began transmitting an emergency report to Hegemony High Command. Within hours, the news was racing through alien command channels, causing panic among military leaders who had assumed that the destruction of New Eden would end human expansion into their territory. The truth was far worse than they could have imagined. The humans were not retreating. They were advancing with a force that dwarfed anything the hegemony had ever faced. The small, peaceful species that had been dismissed as a minor threat was revealing itself to be a military powerhouse that had been hiding its true strength for decades. Captain Torres completed the transformation of his ship and began running his new crew through combat drills. The civilians who had been working as cargo handlers and maintenance technicians were actually trained military personnel who had been placed in deep cover assignments. The transformation from merchant vessel to warship took less than 12 hours. "All hands, this is the captain," Torres announced over the ship's communication system. "We've just received word that the bastards who destroyed New Eden are about to learn what happens when you murder human children. Lock and load, people, we're going to war." The human fleet continued to grow as more hidden ships came online. The enemy had never faced an opponent that could absorb massive casualties and continue fighting. Their entire military doctrine was based on the assumption that inferior species would surrender when faced with superior technology. They were about to learn that humans were not inferior, and they definitely were not going to surrender. The massive fleet reached the border systems and began establishing forward operating bases. The sight of 700,000 human warships moving through space in perfect formation was enough to make enemy commanders question everything they thought they knew about human military capabilities. Admiral Ross stood in the command center of the flagship Vengeance, watching the tactical displays that showed the positions of his vast fleet. The aliens had started this war with an act of genocide. Now it was time to finish it with an act of justice that would echo through the galaxy for generations to come. "All units, this is Admiral Ross, begin Phase 2 operations. Show them what human justice looks like." The hegemony fortress world of Zerion Prime had stood unconquered for 800 years. Its massive orbital defense platforms and planetary shield generators, making it one of the most heavily fortified positions in known space. Admiral Voss stood in the command center of the planet's military headquarters, studying intelligence reports that made no sense according to everything he knew about human military capabilities. "You're telling me that 300,000 human vessels are approaching our outer defense perimeter?" Voss demanded, his scaled hide rippling with agitation. "That's impossible. Our intelligence estimates put their entire fleet strength at 30,000 ships maximum." "Sir, I've verified the sensor readings personally," replied his intelligence officer, a young hegemony warrior whose confidence was rapidly evaporating. "The humans are approaching in multiple waves, and their fleet composition includes vessel types we've never seen before." Voss activated the holographic display that showed the tactical situation across the star system. The human fleet was indeed approaching Zerion Prime, but the sheer number of ships was staggering. The display showed wave after wave of vessels, each group larger than the entire hegemony garrison assigned to defend the system. "Get me a communication channel to High Command," Voss ordered, "and begin emergency protocols. All civilian personnel are to evacuate to the underground shelters immediately." The human attack began with a coordinated assault on the system's early warning networks. Captain Mike Torres led a squadron of converted merchant vessels in a high-speed run past the outer sensor stations, their hidden weapon systems emerging from concealed compartments to destroy the alien monitoring equipment with devastating efficiency. "Control, this is Torres. Sensor grid is down. The bastards are flying blind now." The destruction of the early warning system was just the beginning. The human fleet had studied hegemony military doctrine for decades, identifying critical weaknesses in their defensive strategies. The aliens relied heavily on centralized command and control, assuming that their superior technology would allow them to detect and counter any threat before it reached their core worlds. Captain Lisa Wong commanded a task force of 15,000 ships as they approached Zerion Prime's main orbital defense platforms. The alien weapons were powerful, but they had been designed to fight small numbers of heavily armored vessels, not massive swarms of smaller ships that could overwhelm their targeting systems through sheer numbers. All units, this is Wong, begin attack pattern alpha, multiple approach vectors, maximum dispersion. Make them choose between targets. The human strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of trying to match the alien ship for ship, they had chosen to attack with such overwhelming numbers that the enemy's superior technology became irrelevant. The orbital defense platforms could destroy human vessels with each shot, but they couldn't destroy them fast enough to prevent the swarm from reaching their targets. Wong watched as her ships spread out across the star system, each group following a different approach vector toward the planet. The alien defenses opened fire, and brilliant energy beams began lancing through space, vaporizing human ships with each hit, but for every vessel destroyed, 10 more continued their approach. First wave has broken through the outer defenses, reported her tactical officer. Second wave is engaging the orbital platforms. Third wave is moving to attack the planetary shields. The hegemony had never faced an enemy that could absorb such massive casualties and continue fighting. Their military doctrine was based on the assumption that inferior species would retreat when faced with superior firepower. The humans were demonstrating that numbers could overcome technology if applied with sufficient determination. Admiral Voss watched in growing horror as his supposedly impregnable defenses crumbled under the human assault. The orbital platforms were being overwhelmed by swarms of smaller vessels that seemed to have no regard for their own safety. The planetary shields were failing under concentrated bombardment from weapons that appeared to be specifically designed to counter hegemony technology. "Sir, we're receiving reports from across the sector," his communications officer announced. "Human fleets are attacking simultaneously on 12 different fronts. They're not just targeting Zarian Prime, they're attacking everywhere at once." The scope of the human offensive was becoming clear. This was not a limited military action designed to secure a border or protect a specific colony. This was a full-scale war of conquest aimed at destroying the hegemony's ability to project power across the galaxy. General Patricia Kim coordinated the multi-front assault from her command center on Mars, her screens showing the progress of human forces across dozens of star systems. The enemy had expected to face scattered resistance from a species that preferred diplomacy to warfare. Instead, they were confronting a military machine that had been preparing for this moment for 50 years. "Zarian Prime is under assault by Task Force 7, Kim reported to Admiral Ross. "Task Force 12 is engaging the enemy fleet at Proxima Station. Task Force 15 is moving against the hegemony shipyards at Kepler 442b. The human plan was working perfectly. By attacking multiple targets simultaneously, they were forcing the enemy to divide their forces and fight on fronts where human numerical superiority was most effective. The aliens could not concentrate their military power when they were being attacked everywhere at once. Captain Torres led his converted merchant vessels in a daring assault on the hegemony command center on Zarian Prime. His ships had been built to look like civilian cargo haulers, but they packed enough firepower to level city blocks. The alien defenders were completely unprepared for an attack by vessels they had dismissed as non-threatening. "This is for New Eden, you bastards," Torres muttered as his ship's hidden weapon systems emerged from their concealed compartments. The command center's shields collapsed under the concentrated fire from 50 vessels that the enemy had never even considered as potential threats. The psychological impact of the human assault was devastating. The hegemony had ruled this sector of space for 2 millennia, their military supremacy unquestioned by any species they had encountered. The idea that a relatively young civilization could challenge their dominance was simply inconceivable. Admiral Voss found himself in the unprecedented position of ordering a retreat from a world that had never been successfully attacked. The human fleet was systematically destroying every military installation in the system, methodically dismantling the infrastructure that had supported hegemony power for centuries. "All units, this is Voss, begin evacuation procedures." We cannot hold this position. The admission of defeat was broadcast across hegemony command channels, creating panic among military leaders who had never contemplated the possibility of losing a major engagement to the humans. The small, peaceful species that had been dismissed as a minor annoyance was revealing itself to be a military powerhouse that could deploy forces larger than anything the hegemony had ever faced. Dr. Rebecca Hayes monitored the industrial output from her command post on Luna, watching as automated production facilities continued churning out replacement vessels for the human fleet. The enemy was discovering that humanity's true strength lay not in individual ships or superior technology, but in their ability to sustain a war of attrition that could last for years if necessary. Casualty reports are coming in from the front lines, Hayes reported to her staff. We've lost approximately 15,000 vessels in the first phase of the assault. Production facilities are already building replacements. The human military had learned from Earth's industrial wars that victory belonged to the side that could maintain production while fighting. Every human colony, every mining operation, every research station was contributing to a war machine that could replace losses faster than the enemy could inflict them. Captain Wong stood on the bridge of the Retribution as Zarian Prime's defenses finally collapsed. The planet's orbital platforms were burning wrecks, its shield generators were offline, and its military command structure was in complete disarray. The supposedly impregnable fortress world had fallen to human arms in less than 18 hours. All units, this is Wong, Zarian Prime is secured. Begin occupation protocols. The human victory was complete, but it was only the beginning. Across the galaxy, similar battles were being fought as 700,000 human warships systematically dismantled the military infrastructure that had supported hegemony power for 2 millennia. The aliens had started this war with an act of genocide, believing that the destruction of New Eden would convince humanity to abandon their expansion into hegemony territory. Instead, they had awakened a sleeping giant that would not rest until every world that had supported the massacre of 50,000 innocents had been brought to justice. The storm that had been building in human space for 50 years was finally breaking across the galaxy, and the hegemony was about to learn that some prices were too high to pay. The ancient capital world of the hegemony had never seen an enemy fleet in its skies. For 3,000 years, the planet had been the center of an empire that spanned 200 worlds, its massive cities and towering spires symbols of alien dominance over vast regions of space. Now, as Admiral Jackson Ross stood on the bridge of the flagship Vengeance, he watched 700,000 human warships take orbital positions around the world that had ordered the destruction of New Eden. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the planetary government," reported his communications officer, Lieutenant Davis. "They're requesting terms for surrender." Ross studied the tactical display showing the complete encirclement of the hegemony capital. The planet's defenses had been systematically dismantled over the past 8 months of warfare, its military forces scattered or destroyed by the relentless human advance. The empire that had seemed invincible was now reduced to a single world, surrounded by the combined fury of an entire species. "Put them through," Ross ordered, his voice carrying the weight of 50,000 dead colonists. The holographic display activated, showing the scaled features of High Chancellor Crix, the supreme leader of the hegemony. The alien rulers normally proud bearing was replaced by obvious desperation as he faced the reality of his empire's complete defeat. "Admiral Ross of the human fleet," Crix began, his translator rendering his words into perfect English. "We are prepared to negotiate the terms of our surrender. Perhaps we can reach an agreement that serves both our species." Ross smiled coldly. "The time for negotiation ended when you murdered 50,000 innocent civilians on New Eden. You will surrender unconditionally, or we will reduce this world to ash. Those are your only options." The war had lasted 8 months, and the human victory had been total. The hegemony's military forces had been crushed by sheer numbers and industrial might. Their fortress worlds had fallen one by one to coordinated, Assaults that overwhelmed defensive systems designed to fight small numbers of heavily armed vessels. Their empire had crumbled as human forces systematically destroyed every military installation and government facility across 200 worlds. Captain Mike Torres commanded the orbital platform that had been constructed above the hegemony capital. During the final months of the war, the massive structure bristled with weapons capable of cracking continents, a visible reminder of humanity's new position as the dominant military power in this region of space. Control, this is Torres. All weapon systems are online and targeted on the government district. We're ready to begin bombardment on your command. The threat was not empty. The human fleet had demonstrated throughout the war that they were willing to use whatever force was necessary to achieve their objectives. The aliens had learned that the peaceful species they had dismissed as harmless was capable of waging total war with an efficiency that terrified even veteran military commanders. President Williams appeared on the communication channel from Earth. Her image transmitted across space to address both the human fleet and the hegemony leadership. Her face showed the strain of 8 months of warfare, but her voice carried the unshakable resolve of a leader who had seen her people's children murdered without provocation. High Chancellor Crix, she began, her words carrying across the galaxy to billions of beings who were watching this historic moment. 8 months ago, your forces destroyed the peaceful colony of New Eden without warning or justification. 50,000 men, women, and children died because you decided that human expansion threatened your empire. The images of New Eden's destruction played on screens across human space, reminding every person why this war had been necessary. Children playing in biodomes, families working together to build a new world, innocent people who had never threatened anyone dying in the flames of alien hatred. You believed that one act of genocide would convince humanity to abandon our rightful place among the stars. Williams continued. Instead, you awakened the military force that has systematically destroyed every symbol of your power across 200 worlds. Your empire is finished, Chancellor. The only question now is whether your people will survive its end. General Patricia Kim monitored the surrender negotiations from her command center on Mars, coordinating the occupation forces that were already taking control of former hegemony territory. The human victory had been so complete that most alien worlds had surrendered without resistance once their military protection was removed. Status report on the occupation zones, Kim ordered, her staff working to manage the administration of an empire that now covered a significant portion of the local galactic region. Zone Alpha is secure, reported Colonel Anderson. Former hegemony military personnel are being processed through detention centers. Zone Beta reports no resistance to the new administration. Zone Gamma is requesting additional humanitarian supplies for the civilian population. The human approach to occupation was methodical and surprisingly merciful. Unlike the hegemony's brutal suppression of conquered species, the humans had focused on dismantling military targets while leaving civilian infrastructure intact. Alien populations were discovering that their new human administrators were more interested in preventing future wars than in extracting revenge. Dr. Rebecca Hayes studied the final production reports from human space, watching as the massive war machine that had crushed the hegemony began converting back to peaceful purposes. The shipyards that had produced 700,000 warships were already retooling to build colony vessels and cargo haulers. The weapons factories were switching to manufacturing medical supplies and construction equipment. The industrial transition is proceeding ahead of schedule, Hayes reported to her staff. We should be back to full civilian production within 6 months. The war economy served its purpose, but we're not conquerors, we're builders. Admiral Voss, the alien commander who had ordered the destruction of New Eden, stood in shackles before a human military tribunal on the captured fortress world of Zarian Prime. The being who had once commanded fleets capable of destroying entire civilizations now faced judgment for his crimes against humanity. Admiral Voss, announced the tribunal president, a stern human colonel whose own family had died in the New Eden massacre. You stand accused of genocide, crimes against sentient beings, and violations of the Galactic Conventions on Warfare. How do you plead? Voss raised his scaled head defiantly. I followed the orders of my government and acted to protect hegemony territory from human expansion. I regret nothing, the human colonel nodded grimly. Then you will face the consequences of your actions. This tribunal sentences you to life imprisonment on the penal colony of Titan, where you will have time to reflect on the 50,000 lives you destroyed. Captain Lisa Wong stood on the observation deck of the space station that had been constructed in orbit around New Eden's ruins. The memorial station served as both a monument to the dead and a reminder of the price of attacking innocent humans. The names of all 50,000 victims were inscribed on crystalline panels that caught the light of the system's star. Captain, we're receiving the final surrender documents from the hegemony capital, reported her aide, Lieutenant Thompson. All remaining military forces have been disbanded, and their government has agreed to the occupation terms. Wong nodded, her eyes fixed on the memorial panels. Make sure those documents are transmitted to every human world. People need to know that justice has been served. The surrender ceremony was broadcast across human space and throughout the former hegemony territory. High Chancellor Crix knelt before President Williams in the ruins of his government complex, formally transferring authority over 200 worlds to human administration. The hegemony empire is hereby dissolved, Williams announced to the galaxy. These worlds will be administered by the Terran Federation until such time as their populations can establish stable, peaceful governments. Any species that threatens human colonies or commits acts of genocide against innocent civilians will face the same fate that has befallen the hegemony. Captain Torres watched the ceremony from his command post aboard the orbital weapons platform, his thoughts turning to the daughter he had lost when his transport ship had been destroyed during the early days of the war. The price of victory had been high, but the message was clear. Humanity would protect its own with whatever force was necessary. Sir, we're receiving stand-down orders from Fleet Command, reported his tactical officer. All combat operations are officially concluded. Torres smiled grimly. Then let's go home. The war is over. The human fleet began its withdrawal from the former hegemony capital, leaving behind a small garrison force to maintain order during the transition to new government. The 700,000 warships that had crushed an empire slowly dispersed, back to their home systems, their crews eager to return to the peaceful lives they had left behind. Admiral Ross stood in his quarters aboard the Vengeance, reading the final casualty reports from 8 months of warfare. Humanity had lost nearly 100,000 ships and 500,000 military personnel, but they had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history, the complete destruction of a major interstellar empire, through superior industrial capacity and sheer determination. The memorial service for the human dead was held simultaneously on every human world, with President Williams delivering a speech that honored both the colonists who had died on New Eden and the soldiers who had died avenging them. We did not seek this war, she said, her words carried across space to billions of humans. But when forced to fight, we fought with the full strength of our civilization. The galaxy has learned that humanity's greatest strength is not our technology or our weapons, but our refusal to abandon our own people. We are builders and explorers by nature, but when our children are threatened, we become something far more dangerous. The ruins of New Eden were gradually transformed into a memorial park, with gardens and monuments replacing the destroyed buildings. Children from across human space came to visit and learn about the price of peace and the cost of justice. The lesson was clear: humanity would go to any length to protect its own. In the years that followed, the former hegemony worlds gradually rebuilt under human administration. The alien populations discovered that their new rulers were more interested in prosperity than oppression, and many species that had been brutally suppressed by the hegemony began to flourish under human protection. The galaxy had learned a lesson that would not be forgotten for generations. The quiet, peaceful humans who preferred diplomacy to warfare possessed the industrial might and collective will to wage total war against any enemy that threatened. Their people. 700,000 warships had carried that message across space, and the echo of their engines would remind the stars that some prices were too high to pay.